Okay, so for working with Riso, each Riso machine is individual. Each printing studio is going to have their own requirements. So I'm going to walk you through the current MICA Risograph printing guidelines. So a Risograph machine is basically a magic machine that works using layers of color. So here it says it is a Risograph duplicator. It is a dual drum machine capable of printing 2 colors at a time. And it's really important to know exactly which colors are available. If you want to, you can get very specific about figuring out a certain color, and coming into this graph here that you can study. But these are the main colors that the Riso lab at MICA has available. It's red, yellow, blue, violet, fluorescent pink, fluorescent orange, teal, and black. So those are the only colors that they have available, but you can see here that they are able to create a really wide range of color options. So what is a risograph? A risograph is a stencil duplicator. It prints 1 layer at a time with rice-based, semi-translucent inks. So that is really important to note. The inks are semi-translucent, and that's what allows them to mix together to create new colors. So it's a cross between a Xerox machine and a screen printer. It's designed to create large quantities at a low cost. It's great for layering colors, and it brings in its own texture. Also, the colors are very bright, especially the fluorescent ones. Important to know, the Risograph reads grayscale images, bitmaps them, burns them into a master, which wraps around the colored drum. The drum pushes ink through the master and onto the paper, resulting in your final image. Due to the nature of printing, it is best to print at least 10 copies of each print. The more you print, the more cost-effective the medium becomes. So this is because what the Riso machine does, it creates one master copy basically that is used. It's basically, like it says, a stencil or a template. So when it creates that master, that's kind of where the cost comes from, is through that creation. So if you make one and then make 400 copies, then it's basically going to pay itself off. But if you make one and then only make 10 copies, that doesn't go quite as far. But it kind of makes more sense as you go through the process. So, all right, so image making. Risograph printing is a binary process, meaning the risograph reads tones rather than color. This means that no matter what color is being printed, the image must be rendered in grayscale. So this is really important to understand. You may be designing an image using red and blue, and you can create your image in Photoshop or whatever program you're using those colors, but when you create the final file, everything needs to be in black, and I will show you an example of that. It also works with opacity, so each layer should be at a certain opacity level, which can also really add to how the colors mix together. So if you have like a 90% blue and then a 40% red, that's going to create a different color combination than a 90% red and a 40% blue. Other things to keep in mind: registration. So what that means is that when printing, the paper goes through the machine really, really quickly. Like it just shoots them out, one right after the other. And so matching up the layers is not always perfect. You will probably get several kind of perfect copies, but you will also maybe get a few that are a little bit off registration, meaning that the layers are not perfectly lined up. I think that's something that you can take advantage of and kind of appreciate that imperfection, and that, you know, it just creates a more interesting image. So it kind of depends on your approach if you want it to be perfect. I would say right now, having this be a remote process, probably won't have quite as much control about over that, how tight the registration is. For smudging, Riso ink is rice-based and does not include a drying agent, meaning the way it dries is by being absorbed into paper. If multiple layers are printed with no drying time, then smudging is common. So it is best to try waiting a few hours between prints. So doing one layer, waiting a few hours, letting the ink sink into the paper, and then doing the next layer. Know that roller marks might be left by the machine. So you might have some copies that kind of have this roller mark pattern lightly over your piece. Again, it's kind of a part of the look. But hopefully you'll have several copies without any roller marks. Keep in mind, the Risograph printable area is limited by the size of your paper. So in order to allow paper to pass through, the Risograph must have a small border. So please leave a border of about 1/4 of an inch around your image. You should come look through this page, learn it, memorize it when working with the Riso lab. Just make sure that you have everything put together. Okay, so I want to show you what a Risograph file looks like. So for this image, I used 3 colors, and I kept all of my files really well organized so that I knew exactly how to control everything. So I had a layer for, or a folder for pink, blue, and yellow. So let's open up one of these. His first thing to know is that for the file, so they'll only have one layer open at a time, right? So if I'm printing my yellow layer, this is all that the printer would see. And then once I move on to my blue layer, the printer will see that, and then the pink layer. And normally it's smart to work light to dark. So actually what would be most accurate is to do yellow to blue. So let's open up my pink. My pink is pretty simple. I only used 2 opacities. So these layers are created using 100% black, but then I brought it down to the opacity I want. So if I bring this up, very, very dark. And I try to use very specific opacity levels. So I'm not using like 33.5, right? Like I'm using a systematic way of keeping things simple. So I'm using increments of 5 and 10. I'm not doing anything other than that. So I have my one layer that's, so this is my 25, this is 75. So together this will be my pink layer. So when this prints, her face will be a little bit darker pink, and then these other elements will be a little bit lighter pink. Let's go to yellow. So again, I'm using, I have 2 25s. So this is the same. So even though here, like right here, there's a little tiny overlapping, that won't happen because these would be on the same layer. I don't know if that matters or makes sense to you, but basically this would all be printed at the same time. So these little overlappings wouldn't really show up in the final image, but anything that overlaps with another color will definitely show up. So like these two colors will mix here. So this is, I believe, yellow, and this is pink, or maybe the other way around. But anyway, so those will mix to create orange. And then we'll open up my blue layer. So my blue is what I use for my line work. So let's look at, so these darkest parts are the 100% black. Okay, I think these are just little more 100s. So all of this is all at 100% opacity. This is my 50% and my 25%. So this might be, a little bit difficult to conceive, and, if it is, that's okay. This is, again, about experimenting and trying it out. But for those of you who maybe think a little bit more mathematically or systematically, you might really enjoy this process. So this is my file setup, and then this is what the final image looks like. I guess you can see them next to each other. So you can see, I kept things fairly light. I was mostly using a lot of 25%, so it has more of a pastel feel to it. But so here, where it was 100%, that's where this comes out as 100% blue. But then there's a lot of mixing. So this is the pink and the blue together. But yeah, so it's really nice to see how it works out. You can see texture and just like those little inconsistencies from the printer. But it kind of gives you that like raw feel to it, that it's like this was not created in a perfectly crisp digital setting. It just has a little bit more edge to it. This is another one from the same series that is using a lot brighter colors. So these opacity levels are probably a lot higher, except for the pinks. Yeah, so that's kind of how you go through the Riso process.